Pixar is responsible for some of the greatest movies of all time. As a matter of fact, they're often hailed as one of the greatest animation studios to date. And while that is true, depending on who you ask, they're not really known for their sequels. Now, that's not to say that the studio doesn't have any, obviously they do, but typically when you think Pixar, their standalone titles are the ones that shine. And when you think Pixar sequels, well, yeah, not the greatest assortment of films, but that's not the entire story. Like, of course the Toy Story series keeps it from being an entire show, but I raise you Monsters University. It's a Pixar movie that's also a prequel, that also happens to be really fucking good. And I would go so far as to say that it's better than the original. Look, listen, I know how that sounds, and I'm not just hopping on a bandwagon. I've always had this opinion. Now, a major reason I do feel this way is because of how the movie ends. The conclusion to Monsters University is something I think about more than any other Pixar film, and I know how insane that sounds given how revered the ending to Monsters Inc. is. It's just, they both do completely different things and they do them well. While Monsters Inc. ends on pure emotional catharsis, I feel that Monsters University does something harder. It builds you towards an ending you think you know and then pulls the rug out completely. It's the kind of finale that sits with you, but to really understand what makes it land the way it does, we need to start from the beginning of the film. Monsters University, directed by Dan Scanlon, is a prequel to Monsters Inc. It follows Mike Wazowski. He wants to get into this institution, right? Monsters University. Think of it as the Harvard of the monster world. It's where you want to go to be taken seriously as a professional scarer. The campus, the programs, and the whole infrastructure is all built around producing the next generation of just that. And at the heart of it all is the scare program. It's something that most monsters want to get into, but almost none do. And that's the main problem. You see, Mike had been deemed as not scary his entire life, and when the one profession he wants is contingent on that very thing, it's hard to see it as a possibility. However, it didn't matter, and with all odds against him, Mike actually manages to get in on academic merit alone. Eventually, he meets James Sullivan. Now, Sulley has everything Mike doesn't. He's naturally gifted, physically imposing, and coasting entirely on his Sullivan last name, which in the Monsters world is basically royalty. It also helps to accentuate the impression that Mike is the underdog, and at this point in the film, he and Sulley share the standard dynamic of Disney jock and nerd, which often leads to the two clashing. And within their very first semester, they essentially get each other expelled from the scare program. Now, in their defense, it wasn't entirely their fault, because why would Dean Hardscrabble, this big ass dragon scorpion lady, leave her one trophy earned throughout the entirety of her career out in the open like that? That's crazy to me. Moving on. So Mike and Sulley are both out of the scare program, except there's a caveat, and it's through the Scare Games, an annual campus-wide competition where fraternities face off in increasingly difficult trials. If the two of them win, they're granted re-entry into the program by the dean herself. However, if they lose, they're expelled from the school entirely. You see this group of niggas right here? This is Roar Omega Roar. I forgot to mention them, but they're one of the 6 fraternities participating in the Scare Games. They also serve as the main rivals to Mike and Sulley. Anyway, it's these type of stakes that fuel me, you know? And it's made better once you factor in that the fraternity Mike and Sulley joins is Uzma Kappa. I'm not gonna lie, I'm immediately walking out the front gate because this is nasty, this is absurd. But that's how first looks alone. What's really interesting is that when each of these individuals find their footing, their weird qualities begin to complement each other. It helps that the Scare Games allows for such creativity, albeit in a way that measures strictly scarers, but it's because the competition itself isn't just who can scream the loudest, it's actually structured as this elimination style tournament, which each round sporting a different challenge. It tests things like strategy, instinct, and adaptability, and it's pretty cool watching Uzma Kappa navigate through each round. At first they're merely surviving, but as they keep advancing, we see that Dun's surprisingly aggressive. Squishy's even sneakier than he initially presented. Art is unpredictable in a way that works for him, and the Terrys use their two-headed dynamic as an asset. Their individual growth just feels so natural, and the progression of their teamwork actually helped in making these monsters feel like actual characters and not just convenience for plot. And by the time we get to the final round of the Scare Games, which happens to be a full scare simulation, the stakes are no longer focused on just Mike and Sulley. The movie does a great job of incorporating Uzma Kappa into the narrative, and you almost forget that the film was tailored to be an underdog story of sorts. You're led to believe that Uzma Kappa are equals to Roar Omega Roar, and at the very least they're relative, right? Wrong, dumbass, because while you were sitting there admiring how Uzma Kappa was going band for band with the best scares on campus in Roar Omega Roar, it cuts to Mike, who happens to be the anchor. The same Mike that throughout the course of the entire film to this point had been deemed as not scary, but that's just it. Every single thing that this film did was in service to this very moment. We see Mike running up to the simulator, remembering everything he's been through, and for a split second, we're met with silence. Then the crowd erupts as Mike wins his fraternity the Scare Games. His performance was so good in fact that he sets the fucking school record, and it brings about this feeling of total euphoria that the movie had been deliberately withholding from you this entire time. However, if you thought for a moment that it seemed too good to be true, that's because it was. You see, it comes out that Sulley actually rigged the simulation in Mike's favor, undoing the win completely. And I'm not only talking about the final round of the Scare Games, I'm talking about the work, the memories, the chemistry, everything that Mike, Sulley, and Uzma Kappa built together. It wasn't real. At least for Mike, because to him, what's the point of trying to prove yourself if the person you put your trust in never actually believed in you? It's the type of question that hits deeper than anything in Monsters Inc., at least in my opinion. This leads into the final act of the film, where we see everyone dealing with the ramifications of what transpired. And from there, it completely escalates, showing Mike breaking into the human world. This particular part of the movie has excellent characterization, because Mike actually has to confront the notion that everyone around him was right, that he just isn't scary. There's kind of always been a way for him to quote unquote exploit the wall standing before him, and that determination was really admirable, until it became denial. Except it wasn't denial. Mike genuinely believed that his intelligence and effort made him a scarer. It's not until the cabin scene where the movie forces Mike to see that the results of everything he's been through proves that he isn't. Like, it deadass took being surrounded by a room full of girls that find him adorable for it to finally hit him. And honestly, it's kind of heartbreaking to watch. I think it's because it's the realization that genuine effort does have a ceiling. That want and will to work, as powerful as they are, doesn't always get you there. Not alone anyway. However, that still doesn't change that it is a brutal truth, and it's a reckoning that Mike has to sit with. Literally. Soon after, Sulley joins Mike and the two have a nice heart-to-heart moment before shit pops off. Need I remind you that they're still in the human world? As a matter of fact, allow me to set the mood. We have two monsters at a girls' summer camp in the middle of the night with absolutely no strategy to get home. And on top of that, adults have begun approaching the two. So what do you do in this situation? Well, if you're Mike and Sulley, you lock the f in, and what follows is one of the most extraordinary sequences in Pixar's entire catalog. Like, everything they've been through together just kind of materializes in this one moment, and what makes it better is that it's not scripted. We see Mike's ingenuity on full display. I'm talking zoop, zips, and zooms. He's laying the groundwork, building the foundation, and setting the tone all together so that Big Blue can come do what he does naturally. And that's when something clicked for younger me. It's the difference in their skills that made their dynamic work the way it does. And it's one of the best dynamics in animation. I also believe the way they complement each other is what allowed them to flourish in a situation this severe. And when I say flourish, I mean what the two of them were able to accomplish, it was the greatest accumulation of energy we've seen in either of these films. Before the time we switched to live energy at the end of Monsters Inc., of course, but that's a different conversation. Now, what made this feat even more special is that the two of them were able to do something no one ever has in stunning Dean Harscrabble. It was something that really stood out to me because the film made it very apparent that she's this imposing authority figure that makes anyone feel small, and it helps that her voice actress Helen Mirren really captures that vibe that makes her as intimidating as she is. Not to mention, Dean Harscrabble is also deemed as one of the greatest scarers in Monsters University history. So for Mike and Sulley to be able to leave her awestruck was cool as hell, I can't lie. However, the unfortunate reality is that the two of them broke the rules, right? It leads to their immediate detainment and is followed by an expulsion from school. Now, for most people, this would lead to a spiraling of sorts, but they accept the consequences and move forward, and there's just something so realistic about seeing these two characters not get that dramatic happily ever after that just hits home. Their story doesn't end there though, as we see them work their way up through their collaborative efforts, and the movie ends with the two of them standing together on the scare floor, that same place Mike always dreamed of being, albeit not the way he imagined, but nonetheless, he's there. I think it's pretty dope that Monsters University showed us that it isn't over if you fail going through the route that you originally had in mind. And now that I'm actively thinking about it, this movie does subvert away from a couple of those societal norms, which honestly says a lot about the writing, because you need characters this layered to make themes this heavy feel earned, and Monsters University for sure has them. And dare I say, it all runs through Mike. Like, if Monsters Inc. is Sulley's movie, then Monsters University is absolutely Mike's. And ultimately, his story is really a referendum on meritocracy, this belief that power and or position of value is contingent on talent, effort, and ability. But what Monsters University exposes is that meritocracy without nuance is really just another form of gatekeeping, basically. Because the system at Monsters University is so rigidly defined around natural scaring ability that it completely overlooks everything else. And what gets lost is the fact that Mike genuinely does have a useful skill set. Sure, physically he doesn't meet the criteria of a conventional scarer, but he's incredibly intelligent intelligent and understands the mechanics of scaring better than damn near everyone else in the entire franchise. Need I remind you, it's thanks to Mike's strategies that Kappa was able to use their quirks in a way that excels in the scare games. On top of that, he was a major part of what is possibly the greatest scare ever. The same scare that did this. This doesn't work without Mike. Like, those skills are absolutely necessary for maximizing results in the scaring industry. But again, it's because Mike doesn't fit the scarer mold that the value he brings gets dismissed almost entirely. It's made worse once you factor in that he's a product of his upbringing. He never actually questions his environment, but instead works within it by trying to be the one thing he can't. Because although Mike is arguably the most qualified mentally, his journey does prove that the system, by every metric it values, is right. We see it in the scare games, we see it in the cabin scene, but it's the subversion to the underdog trope that adds a weight to his arc that isn't usually present. Now on the flip side, there's Sulley, who's had everything Mike hasn't, and his arc carries a different kind of significance because of it. I actually like that the film is pretty upfront about Sulley being a lot. Like, he's not a dickhead per se, but he sports a specific brand of arrogance that comes from never being challenged. Also, I love how the movie points out that legacy is a double-edged sword. I mean, sure, the benefits are cool, but the pressure to live up to such a prolific standard, it causes anxiety. And when you've spent your whole life getting praise you didn't earn, losing it can feel catastrophic, which is exactly where Sulley finds himself. And that desperation to get back to where he was is why he begins to make bad decisions. It makes sense that he struggles to compete with Mike early on. It makes sense that he uses Kappa as a means of survival. And it makes sense that he tempered with Mike's results in the final round of the scare games. And it's interesting because it's not necessarily that he didn't believe in Mike to get the job done. It's more that the yearning and that pressure to be the best overwhelmed him. He couldn't leave an opportunity that great to chance. Look, listen, Sulley was never a bad guy. He's more of a sympathetic character, if anything, and I just find it hard to villainize someone whose entire identity is that of someone else's legacy. It also seems like he was never properly taught how to carry a pressure that enormous, which does add to the satisfaction of his eventual growth. Sulley's really just a dope character, man. Shit, this movie is filled with dope characters. Like, there's Dean Harscrabble, and she fascinates me because she kind of occupies that morally gray space. Like, she's not a villain, she just happens to operate at the highest standard in their system. And while Mike surprises her in proving that said system is linear in measuring the value a monster can have, it doesn't necessarily move her position. I feel like if the film had Harscrabble suddenly change her ways, it will undercut a lot of what it's trying to say. The system shouldn't automatically reform because of one extraordinary moment, and I think Harscrabble represents that truth in a way that felt real, which makes Kappa, like Mike, such a natural contrast, because where she embodies everything the system values, Kappa is a part of everything it overlooks. But as I said earlier in the video, that's assumptions based off first looks, and I also kind of said everything I wanted to say about them. Like, they're goofy and weird, but their quirks are versatile enough to make them arguably some of the best scarers on campus, and genuinely speaking, I like everything about this little band of misfits. The way each character interacts with each other feels so natural. Like, I know they're monsters, but god damn it, they feel so human. P.S. Squishy's my favorite. This little nigga is so tough. Anyway, Johnny Worthington of Roar Omega Roar, everyone. He's one of those characters that the movie uses pretty effectively despite not having a lot of screen time. He's probably the closest thing to a villain that the movie has. Like, he's kind of cool, but in a charming kind of way. Kind of hard to hate this nigga, but look at the drip, look at the smirk, look at the teeth, the horns, nigga, the horns. He's got that type of roar that makes your panties wet. Like, listen to this shit. Sulley wishes he had this type of swag. Ugh. They couldn't even beat him. He quite literally lost the plot. Look, listen, I know he's an antagonist, but I really rock with Johnny. He parallels really well with Sulley in my opinion, because they're essentially the same archetype at the start of the film, and they're both introduced in a way that leads you to believe that they're untouchable, but we know how their respective arcs play out. I'd also like to iterate that Johnny is not a villain. He's more of an obstacle, an external pressure if you will. Like, he's not trying to destroy anything or anyone. His motivations aren't personal, he's just trying to maintain the status quo, and I feel like that distinction matters. It also reinforces the idea that the system is the problem. Johnny's a byproduct of it, and defeating him doesn't change anything fundamental, and it shouldn't, and I think he works well in that respect. Also like that the environment is the thread that connects all of these characters. Like, every arc traces back to the world that Monsters University built around them, and a part of what makes it so effective for me is how the movie never positions any of their intentions as purely right or wrong. They're all memorable to me because of it. Bruh, this is a level of intentionality you wouldn't expect from a Pixar sequel, regardless of the fact that it's one to Monsters Inc. Yo, I gotta talk about the art in this film because it's truly amazing. Don't worry, I'm gonna keep it brief this time. Pixar Pixar really captured the liveliness of Monsters University as a college. I like how each of the buildings have a sprinkle of the Monster world embedded into them. And this isn't a typical setting we see in animation frequently, let alone Pixar, and I think it gives it a certain charm. Surely I'm not alone in thinking that, right? I also dig the changes made to some of the characters we see from Monsters Inc., specifically Mike. He was kinda hard to look at in the original. Finally, I'd like to add that the variety in the Monsters design is impressive. Most people don't consider how much work goes into making them this distinct. I mean, it's a college campus, so the sheer amount of monsters itself is also insane. Then you add in the fact they incorporated the human world, and it's a completely different tone from everything else we've seen in the film. The visual contrast between the two adds to the storytelling, and I had to glaze it a little bit. It's all fire. Fuck, it's fire, fire, fire! Look, listen, I just think it's worth appreciating that the studio took a risk on telling that kind of story through a prequel nobody asked for, because it really didn't have to be this good. I firmly believe that the quality of this movie blows every other Pixar sequel, aside from Toy Story 3, out the water. Phenomenal movie, by the way. Even looking outside of sequels, how many other Pixar films is telling a message this real, this relatable? Soul, Up, Coco, and maybe Inside Out? Nah, for sure Inside Out. But my point is that although Monsters University operates at a similar level, it's never brought up in the same vein as them. And if this video doesn't do anything else, I hope it motivates people to watch what I would personally consider damn near a masterpiece. I'm sorry to keep saying it, but Monsters University is genuinely a complete movie in every regard I can think of. The message it conveys is deep and relatable. It gave interesting perspectives to pre-existing characters while incorporating new and interesting ones. It expanded on the world building using a beautiful setting, and it's just overall a great continuation to a story we adore. And at its core, it's about persevering and figuring out who you are despite the world telling you that you're not enough. It's a feeling that everyone, regardless of age, gender, or background, has experienced in some way, shape, or form. And that's why I believe it to be better than the original, and why I always will. Don't forget to pour your milk first. We out, y'all.